This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For November 13th, 2020, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. Well, welcome back, everybody. My name's Chris. I'm joined by Mark, Justin, Larry, Jamie, and Rachel, and we have a very special guest who will be joining us in just a few moments. I'll tease that. He's actually here right now, but has his mic muted. So you can live in suspense. But before we get to talking with our very special guest, I do want to say today's episode is going to be a little bit different. Rather than going off the rails on multiple topics, we're going to try to stay on topic, but also go off the rails. So we have determined that there's a need for a larger, longer form conversation, specifically on technology and pedagogy. And we're going to get into that, but we realized we can't really do that in 30, 45 minutes or an hour. This is a lifetime worth of discussion. So we're going to spend a lifetime on it. So I hope you're wearing your adult diapers. However, my lifetime, not yours. After my lifetime, I don't care. Before we get into that, I do want to bring up one item that's been in the news, and we've kind of danced around this a few times, whether or not to discuss it on the show, because it's very early days, it's nascent, but it's interesting. So there is a website called Bueller. I will let you figure out how to spell that, because it's not spelled the way you think it should be, nor is it spelled the way it was in the movie.
Bueller.
But the website is Bueller. And it refers to a software application, maybe called the Bueller bot, but I think they just refer to it as Bueller, which is designed to attend Zoom meetings for you. And I think probably the most brilliant part of this thing is that it was developed by some college students who honestly realize that people aren't paying attention when they're taking their Zoom classes anyway. So this is a way to not even to remove that one last thing. Instead of blearily getting up and stumbling over to the computer and logging in and clicking on your Zoom link and then going back to bed. Now you don't even have to do that. Something else will log into your Zoom class for you, and you can stay in bed. They've added quite a bit of automation, quite a bit of features in order to make it look like you're actually sort of paying attention, but not really. But this is something we've all been talking about. I kind of wonder, what do you all think about this? Is this the future of remote learning, or is this just two very, very clever college students striking while the iron is hot?
Yeah, it's just the kids.
Look,
they want their attendance
I think
points.
it's a little bit of both, but I do find it astonishing to me that you would pay that much to an institution to pretend to go to class. It's totally crazy.
I don't know.
You pay $20 to go to the movie and kind of fake
it's the attendance
that out
thing.
Too? That's like, why would you pay for that?
I hated classes that had attendance grades. I hated them. I'm like, I'm paying a lot of money. I can skip if I want to. And it's my grade, right? And to sit there and say, well, a third of your grade's attendance, then it just drove me bonkers. And now that they're online, I just find that it's the accountability thing for students. It's like, okay, you didn't show up. You flunked. I don't care, right? That's your problem. You didn't show up. But to assign the grade for it, I think it's pretty smart on their end.
I think it's like a data point, right? Yeah, it's super smart. But I think really what it highlights is that we're trying to govern this completely asynchronous or whatever kind of workflows, but why? Why are we forcing students to have to be at a certain place in a certain time? And I get it, most of that comes from hey, this is the structure we had. We have to kind of just dump this back in here and get people going. But I think that the fact that there is this bot allowing people to say, okay, well, I'm just going to record this class and consume it later is an opportunity, and say, okay, well, change the way you're scheduling classes, right? If you don't need people to be there right now, why force them to, right? And but there's a lot of instructors who
I have a twofold response to this. It's on the one hand, I have the get off my lawn response. Well, yeah. But on the one hand, I have this get off my lawn response where I'm like, how dare they, waste good money on an education that they're not even going to partake in. On the other hand, I definitely want to look this up so I can use it to attend unnecessary meetings. Does it work for the corporate world too?
I think what'll be really interesting is, so with that in mind, right, and with the classes, what would be very, very interesting is what the response from the organizations will be. What's your job going to say when they find out that, wait, you used a third-party service to attend a meeting and made us believe you were there, or you used a third. Is this going to be like, what's the cheating sites, right? The papers.
Like the old school paper sites, the other people's papers and stuff like that.
And now, now that the schools have figured out how to scan papers and use these other sites that fight the sites, but it'll be really interesting to say, wait, this IP address is coming from who knows where.
I don't think it matters. I mean, yeah, it should.
Well, I totally think that the students who created this should receive some sort of project credit for doing it. Like, honestly, good on them. Very creative.
They're receiving a lot of money.
Creative programming that went into it. Yeah, money too. They should get both. Like, all the roses for them.
Like hackers things where Zoom or Teams or somebody's out there going, and you get a job, and you get a job, and you get a job, and just start throwing money at them because obviously they have some sort of skill.
That's education.
But I mean, on the other hand, I do sort of question the, I always think to myself, nobody is thinking about me as much as I am thinking about me. I honestly don't think that the bot really has to be all that smart, because I don't think that, I mean, you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that educators are necessarily looking that hard at every attendee in their virtual classrooms to make sure that they are really engaged and paying attention.
It depends. Are those teachers taking attendance in class? If they're taking attendance in class and you give grades upon that, then maybe.
If the entire experience on the student side is that passive, though, that's got to be difficult to sit in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so that's the difficult part. Like, I can see Mark's point exactly. Like, if this is the way education's going, then we've got to come up with the right kind of program for it, not just make education a TV experience.
Yeah, well, we cast a pretty big net when we said that.
If the engagement is such that, like, I can fool you about whether or not I'm there with a bot, if that's the level of engagement we're talking about, then you can't assess my performance as a student through attendance, because you're not looking at anything there. You have to assess my performance as a student a different way. If you want to assess what I'm doing while I'm in class, you have to look at something other than my mere presence. And I guess that's the whole topic of the conversation here today.
Yeah, which is why I'm really hopeful this bot wouldn't work.
So yeah, we're start talking about that assessment. We're actually going to dive into a lot of that type of topics here today on kind of this crossroads conversation. But that's why we wanted to kind of bring this Bueller thing, because I think it's kind of a little bit of an inflection point of kind of what's going on with the experience since lockdown and COVID and this new online complete delivery platform and modality. And there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of opportunities. And I think this bot kind of shines light on, okay, we force everybody into this modality. It clearly does not work for everything. And so there's probably a data point here that says, okay, well, here's the spots we're seeing lots of Bueller bots being deployed in these classes. So maybe that's not the right class to have on a complete online platform. And this
is just one example.
There's good
too.
there.
There's all kinds of good ones out there. I've seen where even elementary kids have figured out how to loop their video, and with Zoom's video background, they record themselves and they're just putting on themselves in the video background and they're leaving. They're going and doing whatever. They're elementary kids, for God's sakes.
Right. This is on South Park. Cartman literally takes a video on an iPad and sticks it in front of his camera on his computer and fakes him being there. So the fact that it's culturally made it to that point, this is a real phenomenon. This is happening and people are exploiting it. So
my favorite trick South Park, it's real. I mean, that's the reality, right?
That's where I get my news.
Right now, it's probably the most accurate. All right.
My favorite little Zoom trick to deploy is renaming myself to this. So those of you looking in Zoom, you can rename yourself to this and then just tune out of meetings.
Connecting to
Oh, I love it.
Connecting the audio, yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Perfect. I think we've learned how to successfully skirt the system. So,
well, I'm wondering, one last little point on this. So we were discussing earlier that, they're collecting a lot of data here. They know what classes you're not attending because their bot is attending for you. So maybe there's some potential for some revenue generation and some blackmail on the back end here. So that's the way I
think they could be harvesting it and creating their whole parallel online educational system.
I think that's going to be.
No, I'm thinking straight up like
I'll
let your professors know unless you pay me $500.
Well, I think really that will be the punishment point for most people and students, is that you gave up your account information, you gave up the meeting ID and the meeting password to a stranger. And all of these security issues, they don't care if you use the bot as necessarily as you gave up all of that quote unquote proprietary information. And I think that's what's going to be the punishable offense, if that makes any sense. Like, we don't care if you show up or not, but the fact that you gave away all of our information, that we care about.
Well, there's all sorts of security issues with Zoom just lighting it up across the board anyway. So
it's Zoom. It's got to be safe, right? Well, all right. Well, that's our Zoom bot, right? I think we're just gonna be more of these types of conversations.
Yeah. So we wholly recommend the Bueller bot. Everyone go first. So the first thing you have to do is find how to spell Bueller, because it's not how you think it would be. And then install that and go use it, and then let us know how well that works.
Yeah, and please let them know that we said that, so that they send us cash too. No, wait.
Well, it didn't work well for any of the sessions I was presenting from, so don't use it for that.
I've been on Bueller this whole time, guys. I don't know what the hell is going on. So it's very advanced.
I think it's time for a break.
All right. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back, and we'll get into some more of this, some more discussion.
Bueller.
There's a great new digital magazine from Higher Ed AV Media found at higheredav.com, and we do a special monthly show where we actually stay on topic. It's a show where we try to really focus on a single topic and break it down into AV SuperFriends style. That's the AV SuperFriends on topic, found at avsuperfriends.com, higheredav.com, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts from.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to kick off the first of our AV pedagogy crossroads conversation. We've been kind of teasing and dancing around this a little bit for the last month or so. And in this conversation, we're going to do our best to bring in folks with outside voices that we may not speak to every single day. And today I'm very happy to be able to bring in somebody that I've known now for the better part of a decade and worked with here at Oregon State. Dr. Jon Dorbolo. Jon is a philosopher and a researcher at Oregon State University, and he is serving as the Associate Director of Technology across the curriculum, which supports pedagogical strategies for technology. In 1984, Jon received his PhD in philosophy at the University of Oregon, and a dissertation in personal amnesia. He is the principal investigator of the geometry of learning, which studies the effects of space, time, and social dynamics on learning. In 1993, Jon won a grant to develop a web-based philosophy course, InterQuest, which was the first internet course at Oregon State at that time, which he has taught in every term since. InterQuest received a 2013 Catalyst Exemplary Course Award. He also has served as the OSU faculty president in 2018. He was selected as one of the top 50 innovators in education in 2012 by the Center for Digital Education and Faculty Awards at Oregon State. He is also awarded the 2013 Professional Faculty Excellence Award at OSU and the 2009 HUGI Award for Innovation in Academic Technology. He has a long list of accomplishments here. I could probably read for the better part of 30 minutes. I think one of the ones I've loved the most was his weekly contributions as Dr. Tech in a column for the Daily Barometer, the newspaper here at Oregon State. And he is currently completing his master's in psychology with a focus on the psychodynamics of integrity. It's a lot going on. Jon, I'm honored to have you here as our first guest on the AV SuperFriends in the AV Crossroads conversation. And I figured you'd be a great person to have on to lend some voice to this conversation. And we are very happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Mark. Super Friends, I love your show, and I'm really honored to be part of it.
Excellent. Well, so we're in this conversation. It's a huge, huge ball of wax to kind of unravel. And we've kind of done our best to kind of lay it out in a couple blocks, but I want to take some time and go through a little bit of history of teaching and learning and technology with you, Jon, because I know you were involved with some online education early on in infancy. We're going back to like the dream of the 90s time and kind of what that meant. And can you kind of walk us through some of that first online educational experience?
Online, I think it was satellite.
It might have been.
Well,
I'm still trying to picture how you unravel a ball of wax.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
Gross.
Well, the ball of wax is relevant because it was one of the earliest educational technologies. So the Greeks developed a stylus on a board.
Oh, you are literally talking about wax. Okay, I'm with you.
Wax. The students would write out their lessons on the wax. And the reason that was important was because then you could smooth it out and reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. And so it made larger scale education more possible. And the wax metaphor in teaching and learning has continued with us to this day, including the ball of wax, which is when you roll it out. So educational technology has always been an issue for us, and it's always changed the way we do things. And we never really get rid of it.
It was an excellent cover for that, John. So well done for the cover to that one.
Yeah, I'm truly impressed. I mean, all of your many accomplishments are pretty jaw-dropping, but making ball of wax work, that is just like...
Yeah, and Rachel's just incredible. Like, haha, I made a joke. Oh, shit, it's real.
Love it.
Rachel's caught
I've read a lot of Plato, and it shows up in Plato. So everything shows up in Plato. So,
I love Plato, especially like the red color.
You can roll that out too. Oh man, we've already
and
just
we've made it.
He's never going to come back to this show. We haven't even done anything yet. All right, back on track.
Yeah. No, so John, let's
this is the off the rails show. He knew what he was in for.
Let's go back in the time machine.
I've listened to it before. I am going back in time machine. Because I became involved in technology and education, I've gone back and studied the history of technology in education, and that's why I'm able to talk about wax. But I didn't start out being interested in technology whatsoever. I was in philosophy, and I was interested in new ways of teaching philosophy. So as a young PhD, I was working as an adjunct, and I was coming up with ways in which I could individualize the education for each student. I would create a unique syllabus for every single student in a 60 or 70 student course. And it had another time I could talk to you about the implications of that and why that works so well for students. And I still use a version of those methods. But it was very difficult to manage all of the paper because this is in the 1980s. And I was, working with photocopiers and ditto machines, et cetera. And I had no interest in technology. I didn't, you had a computer. I was an old leading edge, with the green screen. And, but I didn't even use email at the time. But because I was using this unique pedagogy, I fell down a rabbit hole of accidentally connecting with some computer scientists that were working with the World Wide Web. This was in 1993. And in 1993, there was Lynx, which was a verbal, written version of the web that was there. But the Mosaic, the first graphical web browser, was in its beta when I found out about this. But when I saw a link happen, hypertext, it just dawned on me that it was possible. I called it pages the first day I saw it. I said, I could put all of my pages up there instead of making packets and putting them in the library, and then my students could go from place to place. And so then out of that, the next day, the guy I talked to brought me a request for proposals for new uses of technology in education. And I was just about out of work anyway, because adjuncts were disposable in those days. So I wrote this proposal. And
has it really changed, though?
I gained a grant from the state of Oregon. What?
Adjuncts
with adjuncts?
No.
Yeah, that's still the same.
No, with adjuncts. No, that's the shame of higher ed. But we're not talking about that. That's one of the worst things that we do.
But when you started it, was there acknowledgement from the university that this was going to be an actual online course, or was this just something that kind of was put together as a parallel and was just nice to have, and you were just kind of feeling out and see if it would work?
Well, since it was funded by the state system of higher education, OSHI it was called at the time, it had some credence. There were some real strong advocate. What am I trying to say? There were strong challengers to this that felt like they didn't like computers at all. They thought that this was the wrong way for education to go. So there were people that tried to block it from happening at all. But it did get into with the registrar and posted it as a web course in spring of '94. At that time, what we called distance education was all done by video. It's so funny that we're doing that again. We go in these cycles. We think this is all new. No, there were video classrooms, and there were studios, and a lot of money was put into running these video classrooms.
Oh, it was tons of money. A lot of it came from AT&T, and we had a studio as a satellite uplink. It was absolutely ridiculous.
I spent the first 15 years of my career fixing those rooms. So yeah,
I spent the first 3 installing those rooms.
Yeah, it was in the 90s.
I spent 1 year of high school pretending to take U.S. government from one of those studios while instead watching Total Request Live on MTV.
Oh. And now, this year, your government skills were tested.
And there were people in the technology sector that were certain that CD-ROMs were the future of education. You would mail people CDs. And they had a good point, because you could do very high production CD at that time. And the web was really kind of rickety. A lot of people said this is a fad, this World Wide Web. Nobody called it the web. The World Wide Web thing is just a fad. It's going to go away. So it was this interesting interplay going on back and forth. My first group of students that were actually
I was going to ask, did they respond differently to your approach to online learning than to approaches that they'd seen before? Because it strikes me that what you're talking about is a personalized, individualized approach. And I think when a lot of people think about online learning, they think about the opposite of that. They think about a mass approach where students have limited interaction or engagement, but unlimited access to information. And you're talking about individual curation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there were other folks that were trying to do what I was doing as well. I met up with, in time. It was EduCause that caught on to what I was doing there in fall of '95, just after I started it in spring of '94, and they asked me to come out. And what they were most interested in was the idea that there was a pedagogy that was driving the choice of technology, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Plus,
because I mean, when you talk about the idea of like the web being a fad, maybe it is, but if it is the best tool available for the pedagogy that you have before you, that shouldn't necessarily stop you from choosing it at the time. Does anybody take issue with that idea?
Right. So when you did that first EduCause, were there others? Yeah, were there other universities that were just striking at the same time, or what?
At that meeting in fall of '95, they had a special session on teaching on the World Wide Web, and there were two. There was a guy that taught art, but what he did was he taught in the classroom, and he had a wonderfully beautiful website. So the website was a resource for the students. Okay, and then I had a kind of clunky looking, goofy website, but I had no classroom. The web was my classroom. So we were the two that were there. There were some other folks around. There was a guy in Georgia teaching philosophy on Gopher, and I worked with him, and there were a number of other people. In about '96, the Allen Foundation from Microsoft, Allen, they had a contest for World Wide Web courses because it accelerated quickly. And I was a judge on the panel, and we looked at, I think there were like 130 courses that were submitted from around the world on the World Wide Web at that time. And one of them got the prize.
So in that, as that grew, so looking at like how that organic kind of DIY approach of doing, you obviously didn't have templates, you didn't have Canvas and Blackboard and Moodle and all those things. So what were kind of the major challenges? Like when you were doing and you're developing your site or working with others, what were the hurdles and the obstacles that people were kind of contending with at that time?
Early on, the major challenges was just connectivity. students were dialing up with AOL, or and the baseball team was dialing up from hotels, and so and there were people all over the world. There were people in China taking it, and all around once it got started. But just the connectivity. So just to give an example, I've consistently had students that are in active duty in the military. A number of them are actually in combat duty. They really were in combat. And so no matter where they were, if they're military, their internet might get shut down at any moment for security reasons. So there was always a need to have a plan B and a plan C for my students under any circumstances. So let's fast forward. Today we're in Canvas, okay, having gone through Blackboard and 3 other things, but now we're in Canvas. And the main thing that many Canvas developers and supporters will say is, I don't know if you guys know Canvas, but they say, don't use PDFs, don't use Word docs, use Pages. A Pages is an internal canvas, you build it right there. And they'll say, it's just as easy to do, and et cetera, et cetera. But if I did that and my students got shut down because they no longer had internet access because they were on a military base, they wouldn't be able to access the material at all. So I have to think in terms of what is my audience, what are my students, what do they need, and how. And sometimes going retro is much better than jumping whole hog into a tool set because you have more options.
So when you developed
this,
were you asynchronous, or was there a synchronous element that was going on with this class when you were in it?
No, it's always been asynchronous. Always been designed as asynchronous. So here's something that I learned. And this became my guiding principle. Is this: the value of a technology to education is proportional to its necessity for achieving an educational objective. The important piece.
Repeat that one more time.
Hold on.
Yeah,
I will.
Let's repeat that one more time. Yeah.
Yeah, at least 2 more, right?
I will.
Because
I want to check your math.
Oh, I will. Yeah. I will.
We're going to cut this out, and it's going to be on the header of our webpage all the time.
I'm putting out our Gopher page right now.
Okay, but
MySpace.
I won't even go there. Here it is again. But I want you to pay attention to the point about necessity. Okay? The value of a technology to education is proportional to its necessity for achieving an educational objective. And I'll tell you why that's true. It's not enough that the technology does something better. It's not enough that the technology gives you advantages, because with every technology that you choose of any form, there are always disvalues or disadvantages. You always lose something. You always compromise something. And it's hard for us to see what those compromises are. And so if we accept the technology, the movement of technology as improvement, we have a belief in the U.S., in particular, Western culture, that technology and improvement and innovation all go together. All technology is an improvement over something of the past. Well, I don't think that's really true. It's change, but it's not always improvement. It's doing things different in a different context, but it's not always improvement. And for that matter, the old technologies really never go away. We still have Super 8 cameras with film in them. Okay? It doesn't matter what technologies we have. And why do we have those old technologies, radios, for example, to do what we're doing now? People use radios because those technologies provide certain capabilities that the new technology has now lost. It takes some digging to look.
I think we hear it a lot more around like technology for technology's sake, right? We never want to, as technology integrators, just deploy technology for the sake of just having technology in a space. And I think that's kind of the modern version of what many of these listeners may have kind of day in, day out. Maybe they hear that, and that's kind of, you're reiterating why we don't just do that.
We talked on this podcast before on about the differences between an engineer and a tech enthusiast, right? A tech enthusiast being somebody who's excited about new capabilities, is likely to be an early adopter, who likes to try things because they are cool, because they are new, because they've never seen them before, and maybe because they do some things incrementally better while, as you suggest, Sean, inevitably shedding some capability to make new room for whatever innovation has taken place. Whereas an engineer is more likely to be like, what is the minimum technology requirement to service the objective I'm trying to reach? Because the smarter something gets, the more failure points I'm introducing, or the more complicated something gets, the more failure points I'm introducing, or the more new ideas, new technologies, new tools I'm asking somebody to become accustomed to, the more failure points I'm introducing. Is that how you think about it? Do you take a what is the minimum necessary approach, or is it more about I don't know. I can't figure it out. Is that the approach you take, or do you think about it a different way?
You've said it very well, Rachel. You've hit the main points. I'm not really a minimalist. I'm a skeptic. I need to understand. I need to know that what I'm giving my students to do is worth the while. And you've already put it that way. But this is hard. This is really hard because they're not distinct. Technology and education are interwoven parts of our culture through all of history. Technology is the movement of information through culture. Education is the movement of knowledge through culture. Education and technology are intrinsically connected insofar as knowledge and information are connected. So we have to go to that fundamental level of what it is, not just what we do as educators or technologists, but what we are as human beings, in order to understand how what we create as a means and what we seek as an end are interconnected, and they're always changing. So neither one of them is neutral. And so we have to go back to the basics of our design and what it is that we're trying to achieve. Very difficult question to ask, but that's
so what you're suggesting to me is that every engineer needs to be a bit of a philosopher.
Well,
because every engineer needs to be thinking deeply about the human experience they're creating when they build something.
And that's where we keep
when
coming
I'm designing.
We keep coming in.
When I'm designing, one thing I always go,
Larry, you and I are on the same wavelength.
I don't know what it is, man.
Every single time, man.
Stop with a courtesy pause and just run over them.
Just go.
Whoever's loudest gets to talk.
Run over them. Well, it's one of those. I
got a lot of gain here.
It's me. Yeah, I have the mute button. But I have the mute button. No, what I was going to kind of say into that is that a lot of times that's what we repeatedly say in our shows, is that take the time to learn what your instructors and your students need to do their job. Some instructors can handle and embrace and want to have the whiz bangs, right? And others just want their piece of chalk, and that's cool. But we have to be in that conversation because the end goal is that education, at least for our clientele.
And what I was going to add is you also have to understand the medium always changes the message. And we might not always understand how or why until after it's been deployed and we're trying to figure out why the experience has changed.
That's a good
Now,
point.
me, I am a tech enthusiast. I self-identify that way. And what I worry about is the danger of creating a Rube Goldberg machine to accommodate people's set modes of behavior. You know, if you're a professor who really likes using your chalk, then I don't necessarily want to change the way you behave, but my instinct is to go, oh, great, well, let's put a robotic auto-tracking PTZ camera in there that'll just follow you around the front of the room and you don't have to change your behavior at all. But that's not necessarily using the least complicated technology deployment possible, right? Or the least complex approach to the educational objective possible.
Right. Well, one of your great point, and the instance of unintended consequences is always a danger for us. But another danger is the institutionalization of technology. So this is also true of education. Education is highly institutionalized, but there is a degree of granularity and autonomy amongst teachers. But as the technologies become more complex, they become more institutional mandates. This is what you're going to do. You no longer have a tool, you have an environment. And the chalkboards might be just torn out. And so we this takes us right into politics, and that's why I'm arguing that technology and education are interwoven parts of culture, because we can't escape all of that. The answer is to be cognizant of it, and this kind of program is exactly the thing we need to do, is examine our presuppositions.
Yeah, that's something else I was thinking about as you were speaking, because sometimes the least complicated approach, or the best approach, is a bit outweighed by the cultural zeitgeist, right? Like if there is enough cultural momentum behind a particular technological change, it might happen whether or not it's what's best for the pedagogy.
Right.
Well, that was
truth is
perfect.
We don't even have really great ways to measure it.
Right.
We don't even know exactly how to measure it.
So let's sneak a break in here, because I want to dig deep into this, because I think we're going to start to pivot a little bit about and have a spatial conversation about kind of learning spaces. And I think this is a good time to take a minute. Everybody get ready, get a drink, get maybe some more popcorn or adult beverage of choice. And when we come back, we'll dive into a little bit of some of the other work that Jon may have been working on, and maybe Chris and I may have helped a little bit in that as well. So stick around.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to move into this next block here. And Jon, I want to talk a little about the evolving teaching spaces. In that first segment, we kind of got into some of the technology and spatial, a little bit kind of around the periphery, but I know that you've been really involved with the Geometry of Learning project. Can you kind of get everybody up to speed, give me the elevator pitch of kind of what the Geometry of Learning is, and kind of what does that mean for space and technology?
Oh, yeah, sure. So after having spent, 25 years, almost 30 years on the World Wide Web teaching, I find myself back in the classroom. I hadn't expected that to be so, but I got tapped to be on a committee that was steering the direction for a new classroom building. Here in the last 5, 6, 7 years, everybody's building 4-story classroom buildings on every campus that there is. We were going to do it too. So we got involved in talking about what kinds of classrooms we ought to build. I would say that we are in a period of time right now that is pretty unique with respect to the envisioning of what learning space is about. Space and time haven't always been thought of as technology, but architecture brings those together in a way that is highly technological. And so we had the advent of the active learning spaces, which you all have on your campuses, and that's a pedagogy-driven space. It's a space designed to reach a certain educational method and allow for that to flourish. There is a proliferation of learning space research in higher ed that is more than has existed before by far. And for really the first time in the last 10 years, people are actually measuring time and space in their research in higher ed, in the classrooms. And then in our instance, with all of those, plus many more, in this 4-story classroom building, we decided to build what I call teaching and learning in the round rooms. There's a 600-seat and a 300-seat and a 200-seat that our students sit in concentric circles around the middle podium with the instructor. And all the students can see each other. The instructor moves around the space. And there's a large projection ring around the top that gives you like a 360 projection that you can cut up in different ways.
You know what you just described to me? That's just exactly the way stadiums are built for athletics, for best viewing experiences for fans paying high dollar for entertainment, right? That's exactly what that sounds like.
Sports arenas, religious venues are often round. Campfires are round. Anytime we go to dances, it gets round. The circle has as a force, and I've studied that, what the meaning of that through history, going back to the ancient Greeks, and what's the difference between a circle and a line. So that's been an important part for us. We've launched a research agenda from the beginning called the Geometry of Learning that studies the effect of these spaces and other spaces on the teaching and learning outcomes. We now have Washington State University has one of these spaces. Texas A&M just built 3 of them. Indiana's building one. There are about 7 other schools now that are building teaching and learning in the round rooms.
I've been trying
to be fair, ours got squashed, and it's kind of a football.
I've been trying to encourage that at our institutions in Missouri, and because I think it's a fantastic way, especially for very dynamic speakers and very dynamic teachers, to reach and the students and really be engaged with everyone, and they're engaged with you. And I get the dumbest looks, like I'm an idiot. I'm like, no, look, this really, now it's not for everybody, God forbid. We keep trying to lump everybody into the same learning styles and teaching styles. But I'm like, for enough of our folks, this could be a big difference. This could be a big deal. And they just didn't like it. How did that go over when this started kind of going through?
Well, okay, I'll back into that question because I'm kind of like the spokesperson for this thing at OSU. And so I do the tours. And I've done about 40 tours of our building and those spaces in action from all over the world. The Netherlands and China and Brazil and, all over the United States. And everybody wants to come and see it. And they're still coming. I got another call for another tour coming up, even under quarantine. So people are very interested in seeing it. Every time somebody comes to our campus, they talk about the dissent and the skepticism that they get from other folks. And in fact, in one institution, they brought 2 different waves of faculty who were the loudest skeptics to see the spaces. And they, in that instance, I'm telling you the truth, all of them turned around and said, I've changed my mind completely. This is worth doing. We could go into why this is problematic for people. People who are used to standing in front of a group and commanding that group from there. They're having that same type of problem now that we're in remote learning. How do I use my repertoire of ability to manage attention when I'm standing in a video screen? And it's the same problem that people see. If I got my back to having a class, how could I possibly command their attention? I think it's part of what it comes down to.
Absolutely.
I remember when in those early days, John, remember when we were doing those discussions, it was funny to hear how overwhelmingly everybody would say, well, I would love to do this, but my colleagues would hate it. Everybody would speak as if it'd be great for them, but nobody else is going to like this. And that was always a fascinating data point.
Yeah, that's right. And let's just look at the sheer numbers of it, though. I mean, if you block the schedule out of how many people could use the 600-seat round room, for example, well, there's about 40 courses at Oregon State that have more than 100 students in it, much smaller number than that has more than 300 in it. Those are the ones that are going to be in that round room. And so you're talking really a handful of 20 or less faculty on a campus where we have 3,000 faculty. So all you need is 20 people that'll say, okay, I'll do it. And, and you've got it. It doesn't need to be for everybody. And diversity is the rule that we ought to really be following in this. But I do want to address...
John, can you talk a little bit more about how people behave differently in a circle rather than a line? Because I think that's a really interesting idea.
You're reading my mind, Rachel. I really want to go there. The behavior of students has changed in the round rooms. This is something that we're tracking. And that's true in all 3 of the sizes. But when you get into the large 600 seat, where we have another 600 seat room on campus, which has a balcony, and you're about 34 rows from the stage out to the balcony. As far as the instructor on stage is concerned, they don't even exist anymore. I mean, they're just too far away, and they're sleeping or something up there. It's always been an issue. In the 600 seat round room, by contrast, you are only 9 rows away from the furthest student, 45 feet. You can see their eyes and expressions. It's a different environment altogether. So the fact that you have your back to them some of the time is more than made up for the fact that you've got eye contact with them much of the time. But here's the thing that I think people focus on that. And when people object, they're concerned about the instructor's role, which I think is a good thing to be concerned about. But they don't think that much about what the students experience. And here's what's happening, is the students can all see each other. When you're in a regular rectangle room of any kind, you see the back of somebody's head, or they see yours, you've got people to the side of you. But in this, everybody sees everybody. Now, I've written a paper on Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was a 1960s architectural writer that put up a battle against the renovation projects that were tearing down traditional neighborhoods and putting projects in place. Remember all those projects that failed? She was resisting those. And the book that she wrote, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is her observational chronicle of what happens in a traditional neighborhood. She has pictures and etc. What happens in a traditional neighborhood, on her account, is that you have a natural surveillance where everybody can see everybody. People are in the windows, people are in the street, people are in the stores, people are walking through. And there's a constant social surveillance. I know surveillance is a word we don't like now, but this is the eyes. She called it eyes on the streets. And she made a direct correlation to that fact of eyes on the streets and the behavior of the people in the space. And she also showed that when you take the eyes away by the projects that would put the playground over there and the high rise over here and the shop over there, that what you do is you actually create opportunities for crime because you no longer have that natural surveillance. So it's not unnatural surveillance where somebody's looking for crime, it's just people living there. It's multi-use. Well, our experience is this, that in the round room, all 3 round rooms, you have eyes in the seats. The students all see each other. Let me give you one example, then I'll stop. When I would go to, because I was running clickers, the audience response system, so I'd go lots and lots and lots of classrooms. And I'd go to that one big classroom with the balcony, for example. And at least once a term, there would be some smart aleck who would be in the very back row, that would yell something out. It would be an obscene comment. It would be something, it would be totally off. There were always some students in the front row that would make wisecracks. It could be, right? And so you would be able to validate this behavior. So the ones in the front row are saying something about the content. The one in the back row is only making a distraction. And what happens in every case that I've seen is the rest of the class turns around as best they can to look, which takes attention away from the instructor, which was part of the point. But then a second later, they look back, and then that person's in obscurity again. Well, this has never happened. This is what our teachers tell us. This has never happened. The thing that happened every term has never happened in the 600-seat round space. And I think you can see why. Because there's you can't hide.
There's nowhere to hide.
You can't hide. Yeah. Right. And so there's less sleeping. It's totally different environment.
I think when you first brought up the concept of the circles and the lines, it occurred to me immediately that a line suggests hierarchy and a circle suggests equality. So when you have lines, students either get sorted or self-sort into where they think they fit in the hierarchy of the class. And a circle communicates an expectation that they will all be equal participants in the class. And that sort of architectural expectation has effects on the way that people behave. It also, I think, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that it's also easier to engage more students in discussion in an in the round classroom than it is in a lecture style seating arrangement.
Well, you see it a lot anyway in some of the traditional rooms, the smaller ones. I mean, how many courses did you attend or were a part or have had to clean up after, where the teacher comes in and moves it's maybe only 20 chairs, right? Puts them all in a circle. And I know when I was a student and you walked in and you saw that, you're like, crap.
Oh, that's how you knew your teacher was a cool teacher, right?
You couldn't hide, right?
It's exactly together.
It's all those reasons, and I think this is a really good conversation, because even if a classroom in the round isn't particularly a school's on their roadmap, this kind of change in interaction and change in being comfortable and moving about, it's the act of classrooms. It's even part of what we're doing now, right? And I think just the whole conversation of there are other ways, and and think about the students.
Yeah, I do think that part of the reason that classrooms in the round get met with resistance is because they do suggest, in addition to suggesting something about the way that students should behave, they suggest something about the teacher's role too that could be a little threatening to some people.
I think that it was super disruptive, like early on, right? When we talk about changing that and how wild that was. John, when we went through like those trials, right? When we laid out kind of test patterns and pieces in there, and I remember kind of the anxiety around that when we started talking about the technology in there, right? And so there was a lot of people that were like, well, I need to have a camera. I need a camera that has to be on my face at all times so the students can see me, right? I want to make sure they can see my face because I am important. And so, but we think about the disruptive process, because when we opened the doors, we didn't have a camera on somebody's face the entire class. And lo and behold, it didn't matter. Right. And so our early adopters went in there and that need just kind of fell to the wayside. But can you kind of talk us through some of that disruption process in there, and kind of when students and faculty were first in those early days, and what we learned of like what we kind of went to that minimalist philosophy. We gave them like the content, and we gave them some audio stuff, and we did basic projection. It was really simplified and really approached, but there was still a lot of high anxiety about that.
Right. The instructors that started it off and are still in there are people that chose to be there. So there was no reason to like force anybody to do it. But it led to changes in the way that people that have been teaching the same courses for decades or more, that they made radical changes in what they did. A really important example is what Leslie Blair did and Mark with their slides in biology 101 and 102 and 103. So if you think of this large space, and you can see a picture of it on our website, you've got a circle above you that's the screen, and it's a huge projection screen, and it really can be thought of as 8 individual screens that are together. And so that's one way you can do it. You have dual projection. You could have these 4 splits, or you get 8 of the same. But what Leslie and Mark did was they stretched the aspect ratio so that that one image was across 2 projectors. And now that's a massive image. And then they took that space, that visual space, and they break it up through animation into a different kind of presentation. And I swear to you, there's not a single thing that they do that's gratuitous. It's all designed to get across a certain point. And the way that Leslie tells it to me, Leslie Blair, she says, I can put more relationships in a single space now. Whereas before, I always had to use time to go back and go, remember the cow that I showed you? Now here's the grass that it's eating. But now I can put those things together in a greater density, and she spends more time on a single image explaining how the parts of it work. That is an advance in my mind.
Yeah,
really big change.
I was a skeptic on one of those tours, and it just happened that I was in Biology 101 when Leslie was teaching. And just the cooperation between the technology, the space, the educator, and the instructional designer all flowing seamlessly in that space. As soon as I left that one room, I was like, yeah, this is the way Indiana needs to create their space. Because to get that many people that close and all of them engaged in that environment was amazing.
But it wasn't like Leslie and Mark, they really picked up the last mile, right? We provided base technology, and then they came in and they said, this is really nice, but I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to prepare my content accordingly, and I'm going to stretch what you guys done to make this more effective for us. And basically what he's talking about, it was screen processing, right? They put together their own screen processing in this space just by the layout of their slides and doing basically side-by-side images. And all of a sudden, like the dynamics of the space changed like instantly. And
did they
look at the
work with
feedback
you?
from.
When they started doing this, did they just do it on their own? Did they go rogue and figure it out, or did they come to you and say, "Here's our idea, help us"?
Yeah, we knew that they went rogue, but they told us that what they're doing. They're like, we're going to do this. So, and we know you guys can make this work. So can we make this happen? And we did. We moved projection around in there to kind of bend it to fit their needs. And it's still that way today because it turns out that that's the more effective use.
Because I really appreciate that kind of conversation with students and faculty when they come to me and they say, hey, look, I've got this plan and I need your help to instigate my plan. And then you can say, well, because a lot of the things that we install, we know can do 10 times more than what we give the end user, right? Most of the things we do can do some very remarkable and amazing things. And we sit around, we lament that nobody uses our thing. And yet, when we have that opportunity, that's why I was curious. It's really cool to hear that somebody came and said, hey, look, you gave me some really cool stuff. Now I'm going to take it to the next step. Help. And I was just wondering if you were involved in that, or did you just walked in one day and went, holy crap, they're smart. No,
they were our champions. We knew they were our champions going into it. When we did the test runs and things like that, we had, I don't know, John, what was the amount of people we identified that were going to be in that space in that first term? It wasn't much more than a handful of folks.
Yeah, the first 2 years, it was about 17 people altogether in that space. And they were and many of those people were on the planning committee in the first place, and they were already working towards this end. So there was a kind of a seamlessness. Leslie and Mark refer to Mark Kolowazinski and Don DeMello's group in classroom technologies as their second family. So they feel very, very engaged with the technologists.
And it's the relationship piece of that, right? And I think we talk about it on this show a lot, that, we hope to see more of those relationships happening, and more so now that we're into kind of the remote learning, and there's all this new pedagogical need and challenges for technology, that hopefully more of those relationships can kind of flourish now, and when hopefully people know where to look, where their faculty group resides, or at least the offices, and at least a contact to have those conversations.
All right, hopefully you have been enjoying the first segment of our AV Crossroads conversation with Dr. Tech himself, Dr. Jon Dorbolo. Please tune into our next episode where we have the remainder of this conversation and get into some of the future trends that we may be seeing in higher education. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV SuperFriends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.